Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Aaron's High Cap Adventure Radio program. I'm Matt, your host here. Today is August 29, 2015, and we're back again about to speak to Professor Tussing from the War College. I want to give a little introduction, okay? I'm honored and privileged to have Professor Tussing on my show. He is the Director of Homeland Defense and Security Issues Group at the U.S. Army War College's Center for Strategic Leadership and Development. Now, Professor Tussing has a long resume, but I'm only going to read a small portion of it, and I think he's going to agree with the most important part. He has been married 40 years to the former Diane Day, has 2 daughters, Amber and Crystal, and 2 grandchildren, Parker Lee and Summer Diane Deach, I believe it's pronounced. Now, Professor Tussing, if you would care to add to that for the audience, that would be great. I think a clearer description of your current position would be fine, but I wanted to say, because based on our previous discussion, how important it is, the latter that I just spoke of, as compared to the rest of your resume, however, how impressive it is. We both know that family comes first. But go ahead. Professor Tussing, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Matt. I'm delighted to be with you here. And I also appreciate you're referring to the Army War College as the War College. We joke around with there's a Naval War College, as you know, the Air War College for the Air Force in Montgomery. Even the Marine Corps has a war college now, fairly new. So if you ever find yourself at a cocktail party, the first one who says, "I'm from the War College," gets to use it for the rest of the night.
Oh, is that right? Okay. See, I didn't even know that. I thought the War College was the War College, so that was something new for me.
No. As a matter of fact, there's also a National War College in Washington, D.C. at the National Defense University. All of the services have what we refer to as our top-level schools, where we focus on strategic issues. They're all joint. We have members from every other service in our schools, but obviously the Army War College has got more of a land component focus than the Naval War College and the Air Force, as you might expect.
So you would say that the Army War College trumps everything else, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. That's just like that's the one, the top of the list, is basically what you're saying?
Well, I would say that only because they've been paying my paycheck for nearly 16 years now, but it's pretty hard for me to say anything bad about the Marines, too, as you know from our discussion. So,
well, Professor, let me ask you this. Why don't you give me a brief description of actually what you're doing? We're limited on time, so give me the clearest description of what you're doing in your position for the audience. Sure.
What I do, I've got the best job at the Army War College. I teach a little, I write a little, but mostly what I do is outreach work with the major stakeholders on Homeland Security, Homeland Defense, and Defense Board of Civil Authorities issues. And that has me working with everyone from the Department of Homeland Security to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security, to our National Guard, the National Guard Bureau, the United States Northern Command, which is the major geographic combatant command that has oversight of the issues within our own area of living, if you will. And as a matter of fact, beyond that, I try to take the same ideas and ideals that we use in dealing with the civil and military partnership, which is so important, overseas in working with other countries. So that's pretty gainfully employed, but love what I'm doing.
Sure. The last part you said is great because it's basically going to hit on some of the questions that we've got here. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't have a guest on cold. I share the questions with my guest because I want to make sure that the question is understood and the answer is clear. So I've got a few questions here that I want to ask Professor Tussing, and it was based on an abstract that you had written, Professor. And the first question I've got here is, in your abstract, and I'm rushing because the time is limited here, but in your abstract, new requirements for a new challenge, the military's role in border security, dated October 2008, you mentioned the term posse comitatus. That's a very big term with people who are familiar with it. You mentioned how the National Guard can work with law enforcement if they have not been federalized under Title 10 of the U.S. Code. Now, I think lots of people, and myself included, I'm guilty, okay, may not have known that. So can you please explain, sir, how that works and why it is okay and permissible for the Guard to maybe work with law enforcement, and correct me if I'm wrong, as compared to active duty military?
No, you're absolutely right, Matt. The interesting thing about the National Guard is that the National Guard can be employed either as a federal entity under Title 10, as you pointed out there, or a state entity under the direct control of the governor under Title 32, which is still basically the federal government is paying for it, or a state entity under what we refer to as state active duty status, where the states would take care of it, or take care of the payment. The tie of the Guard to the federal entity, of course, is that the Army and the Air Force train and equip their components of the National Guard. So that ties them into it right away. But for the most part, if you were to talk to the Adjutant General of the state of Texas, he would tell you that his Commander-in-Chief, 98.9% of the time, does not reside at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. He resides in the governor's mansion of the state of Texas. That's who they respond to. As a function of that, and as a extension of the ethos that we talk about in Posse Comitatus, which basically says that the United States military cannot serve in a direct law enforcement function. Okay, they cannot. The active component cannot. But under the control of the governor in either a Title 32 status in some situations, or certainly all the time in state active duty status, they can serve in a direct law enforcement function. Now, when I talk to my students about these direct law enforcement functions, basically what I'm talking about are direct steps that would be used to arrest, apprehend, incarcerate, perhaps even going as far as interrogation is concerned. But that is carefully controlled by the governor. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that should be pretty obvious to all of us as far as looking at the military writ large. The American people grew up with an ethos that was embedded in our minds from the time that our great friends from Britain were here in not such a great friendly perspective. We grew up, you remember from your history classes, having to deal in pre-revolutionary times with things like the Quartering Act, where literally troops would show up and people would be forced to quarter or to house and feed those troops and things like that. And since that time, too, there's been a whole lot of people who have come to these United States from, well, let's say from traditions that aren't necessarily glad when the military comes to town. So that was embedded in our psyche as a people very, very early on. And over time, we have grown basically in an atmosphere that says we want our soldiers to be our soldiers, we want our policemen to be our policemen. We expect our military to be our servants, not our overseers. Now, happily for us, no one is more dedicated to that position, by the way, than the leadership of your military. And that's the beauty of an all-volunteer force. We grew up with the same gut instinct that in our soldiers, and our sailors, our airmen, our Marines, that exist in our cab drivers, our plumbers, our electricians, and everything else. This is the way we grew up thinking things are supposed to be. So, obviously, you're not always going to see the National Guard in a law enforcement type situation, but if directed by the governor, the National Guard can, in a Title 32 status or in a state active duty status, act as an extension of your law enforcement agencies.
Let me make a couple of points, Professor.
Sure.
The military, federalized military, I understand that. Governor calls in the state guard, got it. Just to be clear, Article 32 or Code 32 says the Fed will pay, but it's still under the directive of the governor. Is that correct?
You know what? I do not believe that's exactly correct. When Title 32 is paid out in support of cost of the Guard,
yes, sir,
it comes right out of the coffers of the Department of Defense. Okay, so it goes directly to the Guard for specified missions that the Guard is performing.
Yes, I understand that, but I was just
now up until 2005. Actually, it began about 2006. The only time Title 32 funds were paid from the Department of Defense to the National Guard was for annual training.
Okay. And the reason I asked that is
time, though, for specified Homeland Defense missions, the coffers can open up again.
The reason I asked that, Professor, is because clarity helps people understand instead of getting muddled information from one source and another source, and they come up with a third source that's not true. I just like to clarify so that we can all be on the same sheet of music. But because of the sake of time, Professor, let me move to question number 2.
Sure.
In the same abstract that you wrote, you mentioned how law enforcement activities and military activities are crossing lines, and I don't mean that in the sense that they're working together. I'm saying due to the fact that the problem at the border is no longer just immigration, but it's also terrorism as well. So you've got the active duty soldier who's to take care of the terrorism aspect, but you got the illegal immigration that comes to Border Patrol, law enforcement. But because those two are at the same location, I think what we're trying to say here is that it's difficult to keep it separate because it's coming through the same porthole. Is that correct?
Well, once again, not exactly. You've got the sentiment and the intent right now, but I want to clarify a little bit once again. What I talked about, not only in the abstract but the rest of the article, is the potential for having to expand what I call the kinetic responsibilities of government along the border. You know that there are two entities, functions, if you will, governmental functions, that we have certified to use force in support and security of our people. One's law enforcement and the other is defense. Mm-hmm. And for what we've already described in the first question, we don't want to see a whole lot of defense utilizing kinetic capabilities within the territorial confines of the United States. So now let's go specifically to the question that you're asking about here, border. Imagine, if you will, and your folks listening, if you will, that the spectrum of threats along the border begins with the simple question of enforcement, and then can proceed up along the axis of a threat to perhaps safety as it pertains to criminal elements, and then perhaps even further along the threat, up that threat spectrum that I'm trying to describe, to where the concern has now gone beyond safety and crime to security and perhaps defense. And we're not there, and I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that we are there yet. But okay. As we are preparing, as we are working together with one another, we have seen cooperative efforts recently along the border to help in that in strengthening border enforcement and strengthening border safety. And that you all have seen exhibited very, very well there in Texas. Operation Jumpstart back in 2008, where we had up to 6,000 additional National Guardsmen, not all Texans, along the southwest borders of the United States. Mm-hmm. Since that time, Operation Phalanx has continued, where you've had more military working directly with the Border Patrol. But you still haven't seen, and I mean, frankly, Matt, you and I don't want to see a situation where we are compelled, or where we feel we would be compelled, to put active duty forces along that border.
No, sir.
What I tried to examine in the article was the potential for having to do that, because our responsibility is to be ready if the requirement ever arises. And then the question of how we can best do it.
Well, then, Professor, let me ask you this. Let's go right to question number 3, because what you're saying, I agree with you, okay? We don't want to go there. You foresee it because of things are happening. We're not there. But the question number 3 would be, as Americans, in your opinion, what can we do to help our country be safe without the worry of those encroaching entities, encroaching on the Constitution in the way it is? So what can we do to get it from that happening?
Okay, well, the one thing that we have to keep in mind as we're doing these things is to understand really the nature of the situation. I almost said threat automatically, and it's not threat. Threat is a pejorative term, but the nature of the situation of our concern along the border. You and I both know that the preponderance of people coming across the border, the reason that they're coming across is they're looking for opportunities. They're looking for.
If I was them, I would do the same thing too. But
sure, and I think everyone would.
Yeah,
but unfortunately, among those thousands and thousands of huddled masses yearning to breathe free, as the lady in the harbors always said, there are people who intend malevolent acts. The criminal elements. And I know you guys are very, very focused on that, as I would be if I was living where you are right now. As I am anyway. But these are the people who deal upon human frailties, but they're still criminal. Okay,
Professor, I hate to interject.
That doesn't make them good.
I hate to interject this, but correct me.
One of the things we have to keep in mind with them is they don't want to bring the country down, because they're parasites that have to live off the host, right? But the ones that we are concerned about beyond those are potentially the terrorists that could try to come into the country, that we have occasionally intercepted coming into the country, and that we have stopped coming into the country from what we refer to as countries of interest on the one hand, or state sponsors of terrorism.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So those are the ones that we really have to continue to focus on. And what I would want your listeners to consider from time to time is that in dealing with day-to-day operations, we can lose sight of the greater threat. And that's why, for instance, and I'm not just talking Border Patrol, but I'm talking all the way down to TSA, when people will occasionally become disheartened or annoyed or irritated about what I will confess along with everyone else is certainly an inconvenience, we need to understand the cause and the reason for the inconvenience and the greater good that comes out of this, the additional security. I know that's hard to think about when you're having to take your shoes off and you're about to miss a flight or something like that, but it's something I think we, as citizens, we need to keep in the back of our minds.
Professor Tussing,
we all have a responsibility in this business. Homeland Security is not a governmental function. Homeland Security is an enterprise that consists of all three layers of government, federal, state, and local, and citizens, and law enforcement, and non-governmental organizations, and communities, and faith-based organizations, and it's all us. It's all us.
Professor Tussing, the people who are informed and who are active participants, who understand what's going on, I'll tell you for myself personally, I'm 52 years old now, and the older I get, the more I go back to the basic fundamentals. You're a long-time service person. You swore an oath. I swore an oath. Anybody wearing a uniform or wearing a badge or whatever swore an oath to protect the Constitution. So I understand all the protections that are necessary. My concern is I just don't want to encroach on our Constitution that people like you and myself and others who have died for it to defend and protect. I don't want them to be encroached upon. So that's why clarity to the public, that's why I asked John, I wanted to see if you can give us clarity, and you're doing an excellent job, is to give people better understandings of how things are working, and that if we all apply ourselves, maybe we won't have to go further to more extremes to protect this country. I don't know. It's just, and I know the Constitution that we have is dear, and we just want to protect it. That's all.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something I would, I'd like to take this moment, because you gave me the opening, Matt, to remind folks on, less than 1% of the American population has a direct association with the military now. You know that. It's important to take a venue like this one and just remind folks exactly what you said. As when you were in the Army, when I was in the Marine Corps, we swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States. We did not swear an oath to an individual. We did not swear an oath to Congress. We swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And from the very beginning, the implication of that oath is we will abide by the Constitution, and we will not abide a deviation from the Constitution.
Yes, sir. And
so what that means to me, among other things, is you will never see, God willing, in the history of the United States, a black moment that, for instance, some of our friends in Germany have now got to reflect upon, where they did things which they knew were wrong and unlawful, but we were just following orders.
Yes, sir. Yes,
That's
sir.
not the way we do it.
Well, people
in this United States military.
People like you in positions that you hold, who hold those ideals, is what keeping us from going over the edge. So I want to thank you. And Professor Tussing, because time seems to fly so fast, I'm going to have to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for answering these questions. Is there anything finally you'd like to say in the last 30 seconds that you just like to say to the public out there? But I just want to say thank you again for coming on.
Well, Matt, I know from time to time the public can get upset with individuals, and I can understand that. But one of the things that I've tried to impress upon my friends before is because of the beauty of that Constitution that you and I love, I am convinced that the institution will outlast the individuals.
Amen to that, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. Professor Tussing, I thank you.
Matt, thanks very much, pal.
It's my pleasure, sir. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Out here.